I like these short chapters. Chapter 14, The Wine Jars. This is Joan Grants' Winged Pharaoh, which plays before the time of the flood. She is a far memory, this is a far memory book, and she is the daughter of the Pharaoh, and I'm reading chapter 14 now. The Wine Jars. After Nea, my favourite person to play with was Nefertari. I thought we must have been friends lots of time before we were born this time in Calm. Her father was the vizier, or the vizier, and her mother was dead, so she lived in the palace. She and I were playing at being dancing girls. We were in the garden of fig trees where there was a white wall on which we could watch our shadows to see which one of us bent back further. I found that I could touch the ground with the tips of my fingers. Nefertari could put the whole of her hand on the ground. I had a cousin staying in the palace. She was called Arbita, and we didn't like her much. She was rather fat and awful bad at running. She couldn't even dive into the swimming pool, but we walked down the steps as if she were an old woman going to wash clothes in the river. She wouldn't come and dance with us, although we told her she ought to try and make her body into a nice shape, and she had gone off to ask one of the sewing women to make a new tunic for her doll. Then I heard Nea whistling for me, so we stopped dancing. When he saw us, he said, "They've been storing away the new vintage, and they haven't sealed up the door yet. I've looked down the passage, and it's dark as the Palace of Set. Let's go and explore it, unless, of course, you think there might be snakes there." I did think it was horrid of Nea to keep reminding me about not liking snakes. I said, "I think that's a lovely idea. We'll pretend it is the caverns of the underworld, and to get there we must walk along the true path. The top of the fruit garden wall will be very good for that. That would teach Nea to tease me about snakes. The fruit garden wall was twice as high as father, and I knew Nea hated walking along narrow places high up, although he would never say so. He said, "I think that's a rather childish idea." So I said quickly, "Of course, Nea, if you think it's too difficult." "Of course it's not too difficult, but I thought it might look a bit silly. Come on, I'll go first." And he climbed up the fig tree and on the wall, and we followed him. We walked along it right round the orchard and the vegetable garden, and over that very difficult bit where one has to jump the gateway, until we got to the corner of the vineyard. There was an old vine growing up the wall near the wine store, which was easy to climb down. 10 steps led down to the door, which was right underground to keep it cool. The bolt was shut, but they had forgotten to seal it. The cellar ought to have been shut by my father's cupbearer and sealed with a royal seal. Nea left us there for a few moments. He came back with a little oil lamp, which he had borrowed from the cook of the overseer of the vineyard. It was only a wick in a little bowl of oil, and I didn't give much light. We went through the door and shut it carefully behind us. The wine jars were taller than I was. They were marked with father's name and the year and where they came from. Oopsie. It's an old book. It wasn't my father's full name, but just Za'atet, a bundle of reeds, a feather, and a small half circle, and after these the reed and the B signs, to show it belonged to Pharaoh. The jars were in stands. I thought it was silly they weren't made so that they could stand up by themselves. It was very cold down there, and there was a strong smell of new wine. There were a few sherds on the ground. They must have dropped one of the jars and broken it. The lamp threw a huge shadow of us on the wall. Nea started talking in his frightening voice. I knew it was only a game, but it made my spine prickly. "Who are you mortals who challenge the caverns of the underworld?" "No, don't do that, Nea." I was glad Nefertari had told him to stop. I thought it was so brave of her not to mind saying when she didn't like things. Then Nea said that he was going to be Tahuti, and the biggest wine jars could be the 42 assessors. He pointed to the first wine jar and said, "That one is anger without cause. Can you, Sekita, look at him and say, 'Thee have I conquered'?" And I said, yes, I can. Sekita, you lie, return to earth. This morning you were angry with your attendant. You said she pulled your hair. But she did. But the tangles were of your own making, for you climbed trees without plaiting it. Also, yesterday, you tried to be as clever as your brother at carving in stone. When you very clumsily cut yourself, you got into a rage and threw the chisel into the water. Pass on. Then Nea pretended at the next wine jar said, is there one who sorrows because of you? And I said, no, there is not. And Nea made the jar say, miserable human, thou liest. Return to earth at once as the child of a cross-eyed Nubian. Does that girl child who is staying in your house even now cry from her own dullness because you have only asked her to play at things that you know she cannot do, and mocked her because she is fat? But Nea, I mean Tahuti, she's so stupid. Then you're stating that, which all know to be true, is as foolish as one who points at the sun on a hot noon and says, see, the sun is shining. So, in talking of her stupidity, you share it with her. Suddenly Nefertari said, do you think they will remember about the door not being sealed and come and lock us in? It would feel awfully like a tomb. And Nea said, oh, we could easily shout, and even if nobody heard us, we could live for ages on all this wine. I said very firmly, I think we'd better get out now, Nea, because this wine will be here for 7 years. It was only put in today. It had been an exciting game, but I was very glad to get back into the sun again. I felt I had been rather horrid to our Beta, so I went and found her and told her that she could give Nati his dinner. End of chapter 14. I hope you enjoyed that. I did. Have a good day. That was my cup of tea.